Ladies and gentlemen, our next panel discussion is going to be loitering around the topic banking as a service, democratizing banking. And our moderator who will be maneuvering this part of the conversation is going to be Ms. Aishwarya Jaishankar, co-founder and COO of Hyperface. A big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. And joining her on stage will be the following revered and esteemed speakers, beginning with Mr. Ajay Ranjan, Senior Group President, Head of Transaction Banking Group at Yes Bank. We have with us Mr. Ganesh Anant Narayan, Chief Operating Officer at Airtel Payments Bank. And we also have with us Mr. Yadvendra Tyagi, founder at EnKash. With this context, ladies and gentlemen, I hand over the stage to you, Aishwarya.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the introduction. I think banking as a service, while we were just discussing outside that it is nothing but old wine in a new bottle, because banks have always been helping institutions, helping clients to take their product in different forms and avatars. With modern banking, cloud capabilities, software as a service, I think now the terminology is banking as a service. But banks have been offering these services in different forms and avatars. The third-party apps you use are nothing but another form of banking as a service in terms of UPI. Your salary upload also is a form of banking as a service. There are many other use cases known and unknowns to us. That is why this panel is super exciting for me. We have a transaction banker, we have a payment bank executive, and we have a fintech representative to speak what all of us have in our mind. So I would like to hear from each of you, right, Ajay, Tyagi, and what in your mind, in your context, what does banking as a service mean? Maybe Tyagi, you could start off. You could also quickly introduce and give the better context on what you do to.
No, so I'll not go to the context of our company per se, and I'll talk about it later on when we get time. But I think banking as a service today is being defined in a very shorter vision point of view. And I think with this panel, what we're going to talk about is say what banking as a service overall looks like. In an overall view, it's not only opening accounts, fixed deposits, and loans per se. It has to move beyond that, which is transaction banking. The everyday transactions which we do, and how can we democratize and make it easy for each and of the consumers and businesses to make sure that banking as a service goes across into the day-to-day life.
Yeah, hi, thanks Aishwarya. And so just to introduce myself, my name is Ajay Rajan. I run the transaction banking business for Yes Bank, where I've been working for 5 years now. And prior to that, I spent 22 years with Deutsche Bank, where in my last role, I used to be the global head of fintech, for DB, leading their global fintech strategy for them. So clearly and I think Aishwarya, you already alluded to a lot about, what banks have already traditionally been doing, around banking as a service, or BaaS as we call it. So clearly from a banker perspective, it's the provision of providing banking products and services through third-party distribution. Essentially, the way it works is, from a fintech ecosystem perspective, a bank which is a regulated entity is providing access to the banking products and services to an unregulated entity through modular APIs. And, in a lot of cases, they're, of course, also building their own wrappers around the products and services which they consume from the banks, and then they bundle it and are providing a different BaaS experience, to the end consumer, who's actually seeing a very innovative, end product on back of a banking API which is there. Classic case, is around UPI, where the regulator created the payment infrastructure. The banks have the network access, and which they opened up to the fintech players, and the fintechs bundled it beautifully along with various value proposition, and I think the final outcome is the customer wins, and I think the growth of UPI as a payment instrument, I think is legendary now, right? So it's a very classic example of banking as a service. Purely from our own standpoint, if I, maybe look at it, and Aishwarya, I just go back to the statement that you made. I think have been doing banking as service since 2015, at which time I don't think there was a term called banking as a service, and that's when UPI was came into play. We entered into a partnership with PhonePe. Today I think, as I think very safely say, the rest is history, and there is no greater example of banking as a service than what I think Yes Bank and PhonePe did with UPI.
Okay, I'll go next. My name is Ganesh. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Airtel Payments Bank. Airtel Payments Bank actually, our vision or our aspiration is really to bring the next 500 million Indians into the banking platform or into the digital platform. And our core philosophy is that banking as a service is going to be the key enabler to ensuring that happens. And the reason I say that is because I think all of us, whether you're a fintech or whether you're a consumer brand, all of us have our own strengths. A lot of consumer apps, and I think Ajay mentioned the example of UPI, as in there are enough examples across. Each of these consumer apps have a strong relationship with customers. Now, if we choose to play the game by saying that our objective is to enable every consumer to transact with a bank and do basic banking transactions, then partnerships with a lot of these fintechs would be the right way. Otherwise, all of us will be spending ton loads of dollars in trying to acquire that customer and, possibly sort of not investing that in the right space in terms of creating the payment infrastructure, either physical or digital. So banking as a service is going to be the key platform on which I personally believe, or our organization believes, that the next 200 million consumers are going to come into the financial inclusion space. So it's going to be a key enabler, Aishwarya. That's what I would say.
No, that's great. It augurs so well for the future of BAS, for everybody here to hear such lovely insights from the bankers. We could maybe start with you now, Ganesh. What I would like to ask is, there are some points that we all sort of agreed on here. There is a rails, there is a infra play on top, there is of course the license of the bank that's underlying, there is a core banking infrastructure, there is a customer experience layer, and lastly there is a distribution. Now the distribution and customer experience layer largely is where BAS has been able to come in and step up the experience, up a few notches. Now in this scenario, there is always this classic debate of, is it a bank versus fintech or is it a banks and fintech? I would love to know who owns the customer, the conversations around customer ownership. How do you see it evolving and how you think it could have an impact on how BAS is perceived as? Because obviously we believe banks and fintechs is the way to go for customers, but would love to hear from all of you.
Yeah, actually, in my view, I don't think there's a debate at all. It can't be banks versus fintechs ever, because each of these organizations or entities bring some unique strengths, and hence they complement each other. So any organization which chooses to look at it as banks versus fintech, I don't think is going to succeed at all. It will always be banks and fintechs. I think that's the first point in my view. Secondly, I think it's a very good question about saying who owns the customer. My own view is, the customer is owned by the platform on which the customer does the transaction. Yeah, regulatorily, I could say that yes, the customer is owned by banks because obviously it's a banking service which is being offered. But ultimately, the customer goes onto a platform because of the experience, and you mentioned that, Aishwarya, is because of the experience which is being delivered, which maybe other organizations or other platforms don't deliver. So ultimately, the customer is owned by the platform, because the customer is going to that platform because of the experience and the engagement they have. On top of it, if you are able to sort of cross-sell and upsell and do multiple other aspects, then so be it. So that's really what my view on this one is.
So maybe, yeah, just to add, and I think Ganesh, already alluded to, the moot point here. But if I give a twin-sided perspective here, from a regulator's view or a regulator's standpoint, I don't think there is any ambiguity or any doubt that the regulated entity will own the customer. Right, so because from a regulator standpoint, yesterday, Governor Das also mentioned very, in no unambiguous terms around it, that the customer will always need to be managed by a regulated entity. So to that extent, from a regulator standpoint and the network access standpoint, the customer ownership, RBI will always look at, the bank or a regulated entity to guarantee that or safeguard their interests. Right, but however, having said which, and the point which Ganesh also made, is that the customer viewpoint or the customer perspective is the front end is provided by the fintech, right? So from their standpoint, it is they who manage the user experience, the user interface, and hence it is not wrong to also say that the customer is genuinely owned from an experience standpoint by the fintech who's providing that service. So it's actually not a versus story, it's actually a together story. Depends on which lens you want to look at it. So I think that's really where it is, right? So the key word here is collaboration. So BaaS as a concept, now bank generally will also directly organically provide these services to their customers, right? So there I don't think there's any ambiguity. It is the bank and the customer dealing directly. There is no intermediary between there, right? But in a typical BaaS model, it's always a together play. So there is never a versus play there. So I think the roles are also very defined, right? The fintech brings in the agility, the innovation, the whole customer experience. That is provided by the fintech. The bank is providing the trust factor, the custodian of money, the network access. All of that is being provided by the bank. So it's always a collaborative approach. And eventually, in my, I always say this: finally the customer wins, right? So he gets a trusted partner, and he gets a best product and a best experience, through this model.
I have a bit of a different view, right, in that sense, and honestly,
Expected, Tyagi.
you can't own a customer. None of us can, to be honest. Ownership word per se is a very hard word to put across, that who owns a customer? He's not owned. To top it up, if the experience has been amazingly good with the banks, and I'm not going against the banks in this stand, but if the experience had always been so great, they would have never come to a BaaS provider in that sense, right? If they're coming to a BaaS provider and giving out an experience layer which the customer is enjoying, that's the first entry point or his experience point. In my mind, the experience is being owned by the customer, and customer is owning that experience in that sense. That's how it is going across. Can it happen without a regulated entity being there? Without the trust of a bank? No, it can never happen, right? So in that sense, it's a partnership both the sides. To top it up, I'll also add BaaS a little bit, a different flavor to it. It's not a BaaS just to acquire customers or get more CASA into the banking system in some sense or the other. Banking as a service should also be partnering with the banks for the regular existing customer base of the banks. A business or a user today having a current account or a savings account with the bank still goes to a different utility website to pay his bills and uses a bank's net banking to pay his transactions, right? Why should it be? If that experience by a BaaS provider can be built along with the banking team, then it's a co-ownership of a relationship, co-ownership of an experience, and making sure at the end the customer wins, right? It can be retail business, whichever way. So I think that's where I would be.
That's a very interesting take, Tyagi. Thanks a lot for that. I mean, it puts a very different spin. Also, Ajay was talking about regulations, and I can't, especially in the context that we are in with the recent amount of guidelines that have come in, very clearly there is certain future for BaaS, which is an enablement layer, and there is a BaaS, which is the customer experience challenging layer, right? The people who went directly, etc. What we are seeing, or that's more and more playing out, as Ajay pointed out, at least from a regulatory perspective, is the licensed entity rules, right? How are we seeing this? What is it going to mean in the larger context of BaaS? Especially the points that you put forth, the bank fintech collaboration becomes very important, but very keen to hear from all of you in the regulatory context. How are you seeing the future of BaaS?
So at the cost of being a little controversial, so let me try tell our friend Yadvendra that try telling to the regulator that the customer owns the customer. I think you will get the answer. So again, I will come back to my point. So I'm not against any of the points made, but again, there is a very clear need by the regulator about customer ownership, right? And here customer ownership doesn't mean that forcing the customer to do a transaction or etc., right? That's not the context of ownership here. So from a regulatory standpoint, the bank is responsible. So let me not use the word ownership here now, right? The bank is responsible for the customer. any grievance, any risk, and any of the parameters surrounding providing banking products and services to the customer. There is, I think, no doubt that the regulated entity will need to ensure that all the aspects, whether it is infrastructure availability, processes to manage customer grievance, query management, etc., right? So all of that needs to be provided by the regulated entity, and in a BaaS model, a lot of that responsibility will also get shifted. Not, I would say not shifted actually, but will also need to be mirrored and replicated by the BaaS provider. So they will have to put in places, controls, and other mitigants to make sure that the regulatory responsibility which is there on the bank is also taken care in the platform which they are kind of doing, right? So again, it brings back to my earlier statement that it is a together story. So it is even from a regulatory standpoint, and I think the governor also mentioned yesterday that we are extremely open to innovation and we want more and more innovation, right? But the innovation has to be in a controlled manner. So yes, they want the fintech ecosystem to innovate. They want them to create more inclusion. And when I say inclusion here, it doesn't only restrict itself to banking the unbanked. Inclusion also means, horizontally, how do you expand more banking services to your customers? And for that, if the bank, rather than developing everything themselves, depend on partners and work along with them to create or co-create solutions, then you please do it. But then the bank will need to maintain the responsibility, towards all the customer effectiveness that I, kind of spoke about. So that's, really where it is. Eventually, the regulator, what they want is that there should be a standardization of process. They should minimize systemic risk. And while it may, of course, at the near term seem to be a little more hiccups and, impediments, but I think from a longer term strategic roadmap, I think that's the right way to go. And eventually, a lot of these non-regulated players will also end up, getting regulated, like the PAs, payment aggregators, which happen right now, right? So the government has understood the strategic importance of those players, and they have brought them under the ambit of regulation. So they're on an equal footing as far as, providing service to the customers now.
So I'll just add a few things. In my view, I think the regulations are pretty forward-looking in the fact that banking as a service needs to be evangelized if we genuinely need to get to digital and financial inclusion. Let me take BBPS as an example. It's a classic example of banking as a service, where it's a platform which is built by NPCI. There are billers on one end, who just come on with one integration on the BPS platform, can make themselves available to all the digital, platforms in the country. APS is another example where, a customer could go to any BC agent of any bank, do a cash withdrawal or a cash deposit in a very seamless manner. So a lot of these things, the regulations are changing to ensure that banking as a service is actually embraced by one and all. So that's going to be my
That's a very interesting take from Ganesh and Ajay. I think while I want you to add to it, Tyagi, I also want to sort of underline what Ajay mentioned about who handles customer complaints, grievances, because in the context of BaaS, I run a credit cards as a service bank company. That's one of the biggest apprehensions for banks, right? We are not just about digital forward, we are also about handling a lot of gandagi. And as somebody who's running a leading fintech in your space, I would like to hear your views on how you're taking steps to address that part of the customer experience, and of course around the regulations and where we are seeing BaaS going from there.
Okay, so let me rephrase my earlier statement, right? Let me do that first. And the first is, I am against the word ownership. Responsibility bank, I completely buy that. And I think we should have to have that in any case. None of the partnerships in a BaaS can work together if there is no liabilities assigned to it to different parties which are involved, right? Now, if I bring in a customer and said, I have opened an account, now bank you manage it, that's also not going to happen, right? So we'll have to, as a fintech partners, needs to build rails and whistles and bells around it so the customer's experience is better. He feels safe, safeguarded, and his response is going across very well in time, right? That's where it comes across. Any partnerships which we have done, and we have done quite a few of them now, the partnership is not in the sense that it's just one account opening and it's gone, right? It's basically saying, can we build more onto it? It's a relationship game, either with the customer, with the banking partner, both the sides. Until the time both the parties don't think together about a customer and build ring fence the whole system around from a safety point of view of a customer, I don't think none of the best partners are going to work, right? In RBI's mind, and regulator keeps coming across in our discussions on the panel and outside as well, the utmost thing which RBI says is ultimately the customer's money should be safe and sound, his grievances should be heard on time and resolved as much as possible wherever it is possible, right? Till the time those things are taken into consideration together with the fintech partner in the guidance of the bank, I think that's how it will going to work across. You can't take a one-man stand all and take all and this is mine and I'll manage everything. I don't think that's going to happen, right? We are a regulated country. None of the fintechs are going to survive if they don't get in line with the regulator also. And this is not nothing against, it's a practical thing. And I think we are in a cusp of a situation of fintech evolution or the digital journey of transactions, that RBI taking these decisions is very wise, because if we don't take those decisions now, 10 years down the line, we'll be in a very difficult spot. So I think I'm all game with whatever is happening here. Yeah.
That's just fantastic to hear. So now, one thing that just occurs to me, I don't know what all of you are feeling. Very interesting that while we've been talking for some time now, none of you have really mentioned things like monetization and revenue in terms of pushing the envelope or setting the bar for customer experience. I think we're all aligned that that's where BAS has a huge play. But let's get to the hard truths part, right? Especially because there are bankers on the table. What does BAS mean to you beyond the thing of, yes, there is customer experience and distribution? What you as a banking partner, I'm sure there are enough partners you're willing to or wanting to pitch to you. What are you looking for the BAS player to bring in the table for you, when you are tying up with partners? That's something we're very keen to hear. And Tyagi, from your point of view, what is it that you're bringing in as a BAS player, right? I mean, there is a give and take going on here, so it would be lovely to hear the views of the panel there.
Okay, so I'll start.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah. So, from our perspective, I think Ajay and Tyagi both mentioned it. I think collaboration is going to be the key. I think what we definitely look for partners is, is there a cultural fitment between the organizations? Do all of us believe that we want to make a real difference to the customer, improve customer experience, or is it just lip service? I think those are some of the basic things which are definitely required. From a technical aspect, we look for partners who bring complementary skill sets, because we don't believe that there is any single, player in the country or in the world who has actually done it all for everything for the customer, has solved all the problems for the customer. I think some of us have solved some problems, and hence if all of us come together, I believe that we can make a significant difference to life of consumers. So we look at partners who bring complementary skill sets, either in terms of distribution or in terms of technology or in terms of products. As payments banks, we can't lend, but we're fine because we can work very closely with, and we do work closely with banks and offer a line of credit to customers. And that's true for every bank. No bank also can create their own insurance product. They necessarily need to work with insurance companies in the back end. So we do all of that, and we look for products or skill sets or capabilities which are complementary to us, and accordingly the partnerships get made.
So that's a very interesting question, and maybe I'll take a step back here, and maybe I want to spend a little time here because I think it's very relevant for the ecosystem audience who's there, right? So, and I'll restrict myself to giving a Yes Bank perspective here because that's I think could be relevant as well. So we are a startup bank, right? So we're probably the only greenfield bank in the country which was set up right from scratch. And very early on, I think the bank realized that if you have to create a niche and if you have to survive against the other big banks, then we need to adopt technology as a differentiator. And that's what the bank has done since inception, when it when it started. The other thing which the bank really focused on is the ethos or the philosophy of art, ART. alliances and relationship through technology. So which is again, in today's context, people call it BAS, but that is really, what 14, 17 years back, when the bank started, that is the philosophy with which, the bank was kind of conceptualized. Today, current situation, Yes Bank manages one out of every three digital payment transactions in the country goes through the counters of Yes Bank. One out of three. And I will let the magnitude of this sink in the audience. And, the out this is an outcome of nothing but BAS. So all of this volume. So today we have market leadership in IMPS, in UPI, NEFT. We are the largest processing bank by volumes. All of this is only because of partnerships that we've done with the fintech ecosystem, and these are the volumes which then goes through our counters that we manage. So it is a very, very relevant business model for the bank, and also very profitable. So again, the customer gets a superior experience. The fintech obviously, gets more business, grows, gets their, valuation increase, and of course, the bank also generates a good revenue pool out of, managing these voluminous transaction, right? So to your point on monetization, there is a monetization model around, how we run BAS. So it becomes a win-win proposition, for everyone. So that's, really where the concept of BAS and what it means for the bank and the tangible outcome and the market positioning of the bank because of this model, really is.
So I agree to a greater extent. I think I'll answer Aishwarya's questions on what is banks looking on a fintechs and what is fintech looking for a bank in a smaller answer, and then probably get more detailing around that. So I think in each and every fintech which is there in the country or starting up, they are trying to find the niche in which they want to play across in the beginning. Similarly, banks have found their niche, and there are some core products which banks have and banking does. Fintech partnership or a BAS partnership coming across to the bank is trying to find those niche areas where the bank needs support or can augment the need of the customers which fintech partner comes across, and making sure the entire experience becomes easy. We deal into business payments, and B2B payments is an area which we think is needs to be which needs quite a bit of an overhaul, be it NEFT, RTGS, or normal payouts and things like that, or say vendors, suppliers, beneficiaries, whatever you want to talk about, commercial cards and the likes of it. I think that's the niche which we play in, and that niche makes sure that bank is owning the customer as far as or taking the responsibility of the customers to give a credit line or having a current account and the likes of it. But entire layer of an experience of a consumer or a business saying I can do multiple payouts at a click of a button is a convenience which we bring along to the bank, which banks customers also need and the customers outside also need. So that's where the whole relationship becomes much more convenient for both the parties involved. And ultimately, in the end, the consumer or the business wins because he's getting a better experience from both the sides. When he gets a better experience and banks gets a better experience for their own customers, obviously there is a little bit of a penny to be made on each and every business line, and that's where everybody is making money. So I think monetization is happening. I don't think it's that this is all happening without monetization and this is just in the air. I don't think that's the situation. Everybody is making money onto the process, and monetization is very much possible in BAS ecosystem, and both the parties, banks and fintechs, are making money onto it.
Actually, the whole BAS model, is fairly matured and evolved. Actually, the way I look at it, from my own experience as well, and very clearly, banks recognize that, they are not able to build everything. So it is always better, more agile, more flexible, more scalable, to build, this. And, it's, again, I think banks realize also that, you cannot only grow organically. You also need to create an inorganic acquisition funnel for the bank, which is more digital, which is more scalable. And that is where, these partnerships play out, right? Fintechs also realize that, they can actually build up better products and better service if they integrate, with the bank, and they channelize their energies on creating only the user experience, for the customer in a scalable model. So I think people are now very matured enough, and whenever we do these discussions with partners, right? So it's very clearly. A win-win model. So nobody is trying to squeeze the last penny because people realize that if either of them don't make money, it's not going to be a very sustainable model. And this is not, end of the day, the customer is there at the end, right? So you cannot. It's not a switch-on, switch-off relationship. These are all long-term strategic relationships. So you need to make sure that either of the parties are integrated for the longer term. So it's important.
That's a very interesting point you make, Ajay, on long-term sustainability because apparently the funding winter is around. If there are any investors around in the
All the more
audience,
reason.
you can be rest assured that if there is a bank scrutinizing and taking the deal, they have thought through the business model and viability of the partnership. I'm hoping that will give you all some peaceful nights. But coming back to what you said, Ajay, right? I mean, it was very interesting when you said BAS is sort of matured or saturated. I think, as somebody who's an observer in the ecosystem and participant, if I look at payments, I'm totally with you. The way banks have unbundled payments, right from AEPS, IMPS, NEFT, the whole hog of it, UPI. I mean, payments is out there. I would even use the word saturated. When you look at lending, when you go to the liability part where neobanks and everybody are coming up, I know it wasn't in our agenda. I do see there is some time. So I would love to hear your thoughts on where are we in those aspects. Payments as a country, I think we're up there. I mean, we are a showcase to the globe with UPI, real-time payments, everything. But when it comes to lending, we did discuss about the regulatory tailwinds, right? Where lending models, because BAS wasn't working, there were alternate models and that's sort of coming down. So I feel there is some journey and of course liabilities. I would love to hear Ganesh's thoughts on where are you looking at BAS in those aspects, right?
Yeah, sure. I'll go first. Actually, I while of course payments has taken a lead in terms of BAS as a platform, I still think that there is still a long way to go on payments itself. While of course from a digital standpoint, we've done our bit. We've got 250, 300 million customers there. But fact is, with more than a billion Indians or close to 800 million adults in India, there are still half a billion Indians who are not on the digital platform, who are possibly still using cash as the mode in which they are doing transactions. So I do think that the platform is there. And a lot of good work has been done on building the platform, either by NPCI or by some of us in this room. The regulations are also very clear. I think now it's left to us to really forge those partnerships and make maximum use of it. So I think that's my view on payments. Lending, for us again, as Payments Bank, we anyway, as our DNA, working in collaboration with others is the most important. The regulation anyway doesn't allow us to lend. So we are, working very closely with, a couple of banks, with whom sort of, I think under the right regulatory framework, we are sort of reaching out and making sure that customers of Airtel Payments Bank get a line of credit or get a loan. So that's really what my thought is.
So when I said the BAS model is matured, I meant the approach is matured. By no stretch of imagination is it anywhere even near saturated. So, and including in payments, and I will not repeat, what Ganesh already said. So, one has to understand that traditional banks, though in a previous session I heard someone say, while we tend to call it traditional bank, but banks are not traditional right now by any standards. Banks are equally digitally savvy. But traditionally, the banks have actually looked at, the whole value chain, right, in providing banking products and services. Whereas BAS is more modular, right? And the players pick up certain friction areas or certain areas where there is more value to be made, and that's where they work on, right? So far we have seen BAS very relevant around payments, lending, investments, and some of those areas, right? But in my view, while those, of course, there is a lot to do even on those areas, but in some other areas like trade finance, supply chain, agri-tech, there is a lot more to do in those areas as well. And also what I would like to allude here is, the government has come out with, a lot more new initiatives, right? They launched, PM Modi launched the NLP, the National Logistics Policy, the ULIP, the Unified Logistic Platform got announced, ONDC got announced, OCAN has got announced. So, this actually creates a lot of opportunities for players to think, innovate, and create customer solutions around, some of these models, and then work along with banks to eventually give benefit to the customer. And I'll maybe take this forum to give a shout out to all the fintech ecosystem players who are there. So at Yes Bank, for example, we have a API marketplace, right? We call it Yes Connect. It's like an Amazon where we bundle banking solutions and beyond banking solutions, bring it on a platform, and then offer access to Yes Bank customers, both retail as well as businesses, to choose what they want, right? So if they like a Yes Bank solution, they can subscribe to a Yes Bank solution. If they like a partner solution, they go subscribe to the partner solution. It gives access, to the partner to get access to Yes Bank customer. It also is a platform where I acquire new customers through my fintech associations, right? So anyone who's present here, or who knows of people or founders who need such access, my team is in the room. Please feel free to connect with them and work along with Yes Bank. We'll be very happy to support you.
That's very awesome. Tyagi, your take?
So when we talk about payments being matured, I think in our mind we always think of UPI and retail payments,
I
right?
agree.
So let's stay away from that for the time being. I think the payments in some sense or the other, when you buy from Amazon digitally, there is a lot of transactions which happen behind that. That corporate would have bought raw material from somebody, would have taken service from somebody else, he would have paid rentals, he would have paid his utility bills and 100 other things till the time he comes out with the product which you can buy through digital, which we talk about. And that back end piece nobody talks about, right? That payment piece is still broken. And that's where we say that people like us, EnKash comes across, and let's talk about that piece as well and make sure that we digitize the entire B2B system together and make sure that it's a success story, digitization from end to end. And payment API, BaaS is end to end from consumer till the end business, and not only on the one leg. And if in this whole ecosystem, if there is a lending line and things like that required, I think that's where the bankers will have to come across and talk about. So it has to be entire ecosystem and not just payments like UPI and the front ending which is happening.
This is fantastic, and I'm sure Tyagi and team are solving for that as well. One part is we all heard from you is, what do you say, people who are propelling BaaS in your respective organizations. I mean, to sort of take a step outside, I would love to hear your views as the participants in this ecosystem. What is your wish list? Each of you, not bound by the organization nor the products you're building, etc. What is your top 3 asks, or what do you want to see happening in BaaS? We touched upon OC, and we are talking about ONDC. There is a lot of stuff happening. Account aggregator is something else that comes to my mind. What could this all culminate into? What would your wish list for BaaS look like, each of you, if you were to come up with 3? Tyagi, maybe we'll start with you.
So I can give a wish list which I want from the banks, right? That's how it would be.
This is a place, Tyagi.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
And how can the banks help us to go to the regulator as well? That's another piece which is there. But having said that, I think it's not a wish list anymore because banks have opened up and started thinking about what is happening there. I think it was 5 years ago when we said banks don't understand what you're trying to do. That's not the scenario anymore. Banks understand it very well what you're trying to do. Banks understand the technology which you are bringing across and how is it going to help the banks together, right? So I think that openness has come across. The wish list which comes across is there are certain aspects of regulator controls and the ecosystem which is safeguarding everybody else. That's where I think banks needs to be a bit more forthcoming and partner with the fintechs and say, guys, we need to make it successful, but these are 3 more things which we need to talk about, right? Let's get that sorted out. What we have seen, thankfully, we have passed that milestone in some sense or the other. But we have seen quite a few new fintechs coming across, building the whole thing and then realizing it doesn't even fit into the whole ecosystem somewhere. Right? So I think that has to be very much there. Second, I think educating the customer or the general education overall is something which banks and regulator needs to take up, right? And the third thing which comes across to my mind is, don't think of BaaS as only as a customer acquisition strategy. It has to be a customer solution strategy in overall scheme of things, and that's where it should be moving across. That's about it.
Lovely. Ajay?
So I already, covered a lot of it, in my previous session. So I'll maybe just, summarize and culminate it by saying, it's a great opportunity. Banks are very hungry for BaaS. At least, the tech-savvy banks, and I would put, Yes Bank as, as being one of them, is very, very clear strategy that we will, and we've been doing this for almost 14, 15 years now. So it's not a 2-3 year prior story. We are very open to partnership. What we want is that the customer experience, should be very, very superior. And more that you are able to innovate, more that you are able to create customer value. Please come talk to us. There is a platform which we have created. I already spoke about it. Yes Connect. Please come, embed yourselves, provide solutions to customers, build up your business volumes, and help us generate more revenue and help us generate more customers.
So, in my view, I think, for banking as a service to succeed, all the ingredients are there. I think we've got the right regulation, we've got the right technology, we've got everything in place. I think it's now a function of all of us in the ecosystem actually using these ingredients and actually generating and delivering value to the customer. So I would say that the ball is in our court to see how can we actually take banking as a service to the next level by using all of these ingredients and platforms to really, delight customers. That's what I would say.
This has been awesome. I hope there are fintech product builders out here listening to this. Banks are calling out to you saying, let's collaborate, let's create stuff. So I hope we all make the most of it. We're right on time. We can have a few questions. I don't know if Nadeem is around. Maybe 1 or 2 questions, Nadeem, and we can be done. But I think it's been a great panel. Thanks a lot for making it. So it was very practical, at least, from this thing. We know what to do next. So right away to all the bankers in the panel. And of course, Tyagi is here to guide you to build with banks. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. It has been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.